today we are moving into persuasive speaking part 2. So this is the second half of chapter 12. And as we're kind of getting prepared for the persuasive speech, we have quite a few things to go over. So today, just generally, we're going to go over argument fallacies. We're going to talk about the components of persuasive messages, so the pieces that go together in a persuasive message that we're going to be looking for as speakers. The types of persuasive claims. So the statements that you make, there's different kinds when we're talking about like negotiating truth as a persuasive speaker. We're going to talk about organization styles of persuasive speeches, which is something like you will probably want to keep a good eye on and maybe jot down a little bit later, because those will be really helpful in starting to like write your outlines and figure out what you want to talk about. And then lastly, we'll briefly talk about ethics and persuasive speaking. And then we also have an activity that I'm really excited for later that sitting in the circle is actually going to benefit us today. That was not only by chance. That's also going to help us out with that today. So the first thing that I want to go over today is argument fallacies, or these are also referred to as like logical fallacies. Have any of you heard of this term before? Yes? Okay. For those of you who haven't, or just as a refresher, so an argument fallacy or a logical fallacy is a type of argument that doesn't actually follow like good, valid logic. It may sound like it makes sense, but generally speaking, it doesn't follow good lines of argument, and it's very easy to poke holes in those types of fallacies. So what this does, and why we want to avoid these as speakers, is it discredits the argument, so that discredits you as a speaker, so that threatens your ethos, if you remember from last week. But then also the logical fallacy that also can threaten your logos. So like the logic that you actually use to set up a persuasive message is also going to be threatened. I really like argument fallacies. This is like, I'm a super nerd about them. They're so interesting to me. So if I'm like just like super like excited about them, just I know that it's okay that you're not on the same level as me, but I really think that they're interesting. And like once you see them, you can't unsee them. So the first one, pretty basic one that you've probably seen or heard before. All of these you probably have, maybe just not a name for it. So the first one is ad hominem, which refers to a personal attack in an argument. So it occurs when an argument cites an individual's character or traits as a reason for their claim being flawed. So our example quote up there is that Miss Fallon is a woman and women are too emotional to have logical opinions, so her argument that pineapple belongs on pizza is incorrect. So essentially what this is doing is that person who is making this fallacy is attacking things about me as a person that have nothing to do with how my argument's structured, right? So they're attacking my gender. Other times you can attack like other things like maybe your political or religious beliefs, other aspects of your background. But that has nothing to do with whether pineapple belongs on pizza. So that's where kind of that personal attack comes in. So our Peanuts quote up here with Linus and Lucy, it says, that can't be true because you're an idiot. You can, whether or not Linus up here is an idiot is kind of irrelevant to the argument he's making. But we see this all the time. Where have you, so thinking about like personal attacks in an argument or in a debate, where have you seen these before? Can you think of any examples? Yes?
In like political debates.
Yeah. Political debates, these happen a lot. And if you've seen like campaign ads that like, have you heard the term mudslinging before in politics? Yeah, so this is exactly what this argument fallacy is basically using those personal attacks, not actually engaging with the content of the argument, but just like taking shots at each other, like back and forth, right? Where else have you seen this? Yes?
I feel like I see this kind of stuff on TikTok. Like if someone makes like an argument or they're like just saying something, then you'll see in the comments like people just be like saying stuff. Like I see a lot of like stuff.
Yeah.
They're like, oh well, you're this, so you're not right or whatever.
Yeah, and social media is particularly bad about this because you hide behind the screen, right?
Yeah.
Especially like on TikTok in the comments, like that person's maybe not gonna like put their face in like a response video, but they can kind of hide behind their comments there. So yeah, you see that a lot. Absolutely. Yeah, so those are two great examples of that personal attack that comes in. So hopefully as we kind of see these, you can be like, oh, that's an ad hominem or a personal attack. Okay, so next we have a hasty generalization. So this type of fallacy occurs when an argument is made based on either very little evidence, biased evidence, or an isolated incident. So this can, I think you're probably maybe more familiar with the term stereotyping. We've talked about that before. So this is kind of in a form of that occurs in arguments or in like debates and things like that. So for example, my math professor was so rude and inconsiderate last week, so all professors are terrible people. So obviously in my mind that does take like a very small like isolated incident and translates to multiple situations, which is like how our brains work. That's, something that we all experience as people. But that's, something that we may want to avoid in arguments. So our example up there with our cartoon, it says, all sports car drivers are so aggressive, as that person is like getting cut off by a sports car. Where have you seen like this type of fallacy? What kind of examples can you think of with a hasty generalization? Where might you see this?
What I hear all the time is like, they're like, oh, I hate all men. Men are terrible.
Okay.
Like, not every man. You know what I mean?
Sure. Okay. Other examples, yeah.
I think like when you go to a restaurant and have like a bad like experience there, and you'll like never go back to that chain of restaurant, just that location or something.
Yeah, like that makes me think of like Yelp reviews all the time. Like someone's like, I went here the one time and this person was so rude and all of that stuff. Yeah, because like your waitress may have just been having a really bad day, or like they were short staffed or something. But yeah, people will write off. I know that my mom does this this exact thing where if she, I love my mom. I don't want to trash her too much, but she does where it's like she will have one bad experience with a store or a restaurant, and I'm like, Mom, that was 10 years ago. Like you can't, like if it was like last week and it's happened to you multiple times, that's one thing. I was like, this is like literally a decade ago. Can we like let's try it again? Like we'll be okay. So yeah, great examples of hasty generalizations there. So next we have false cause. The false cause fallacy, or I kind of like to think of this one as correlation versus causation. Do we know the difference in these terms? Yeah. Okay. So one is just as a review. So causation is where you can actually prove the connection between cause and effect. That there's evidence to show that one thing, like A, caused B. Correlation refers to like A and B having like similar paths, or like if we're looking at data, they may be going the same way, but you can't necessarily prove a connection there. So when we see this in an argument fallacy, this looks like when a relationship between two events is claimed to be cause and effect, but they may only have a loose connection. So for example, crime rates in Missouri went down over the last year, but ice cream sales went up over the last year. Therefore, ice cream prevents crime, which like I personally think is the truth, because I know that like ice cream instantly improves my mood. But we don't have enough evidence. These two things are so like taken out of context that you can't prove that there's a relationship there. So for our little cartoon there, our man who is smoking is saying, people died of cancer before cigarettes were invented, so smoking doesn't cause cancer. So that first statement might be true. Like, I mean, it is. People got cancer before cigarettes were around. But you can't use just that claim to prove that smoking doesn't cause cancer, because those two things are just like a correlation. They're not, you can't prove a cause-effect relationship there. Can you think of any, this one is a little bit different, but have you ever seen like an example of a false cause fallacy? That's kind of a tough one there. Anybody? Yeah.
I think in like crime rates, when people like evaluate crime rates, they look at different parts of like a community, when in reality is probably not like one specific thing. Like they could say the crime rate's up because the education system's bad, or the crime rate's up because everyone